On to bed. I need to hope that my hip stops being so swollen before I can even try. So, yeah. It'll happen, at least to the point that I can get up there. It won't be exactly dignified. Very unlikely. But that I'll do anything but basically crawl up the stairs. But I will make it. So, in an old, I guess you sort of forget traditions whenever you're learning as a kid. Nobody sits there and says, this is tradition, this is tradition, this is tradition. My grandmother didn't honestly care that much about traditions. So she upheld the ones that she felt like she absolutely had to, and she didn't say tradition every other sentence because mostly she just resented tradition. Everything's I learned from her. Everything's I learned to expand on with other people to learn how to do those traditions better. So I'm going to use the word traditionally. Stew is the precursor to a lot of soups. Way back whenever they didn't have refrigerators and or basically stoves as we know them, big stew pots were a thing. And soup was either something that you didn't have a lot of stuff, so you just kind of took what was leftovers and you sort of threw them in a pot and boiled them. It was also something that came after stew. So like, I made a large, ginormous batch of stew. So we're gonna freeze some of it. But also, some of it's gonna be tomorrow night's dinner. But I also had, that bit at the bottom of the pan where there was kind of a bit too much of, the broth and maybe like some bits of corn and stuff at the bottom that I couldn't really add to the other containers, and it didn't really make sense to redistribute the contents of the other containers, which is another method to sort of deal with that. So I put those in containers and I'm going to freeze them. As is, because just having that base, they'll only really be able to be heated once, but they will make amazing, amazing quick soup. Because I spent so long on this to even begin with. It will add amazing flavor as a base for like a cream soup. That's what I plan on doing with it. Because cream soup, you don't just have cream. A really good cream soup, really good, you start it with some broth. Not water, broth. And you add some milk, you add some cheese, you add whatever, And I'm thinking maybe I'll do this into like cream of corn, cream of mushroom or something. Chris has been sort of bugging me to make my cream soup again. So I'm going to freeze those, and they're going to be labeled specifically for that. They're in smaller containers so I can make smaller batches. Because you don't want to reheat it too many times. But I spend 3 days boiling out the bones. You end up with most of it being more of like a simmer, because you have to use something to kind of let it go overnight. And so I usually use a slow cooker for that, because that's kind of made for that. It's a bit safer than leaving it on the stove. You don't want to leave a stove on overnight, but a slow cooker is a bit better than that. So yeah, it has to basically go for 3 days at least. You can do it for longer. The longer that you boil bones, though, the stronger the bone broth is. And then that takes on other flavors very well. And this has already cooked with, it is made from the bone broth, and then it spent like a day just, well, not an entire day, but then it spent time with like the ingredients in it. After, I went through and took out all the bones. Chris was really amazed at that process because he likes to watch. So he was like, wow, why do you do this? Why do you do that? And I was, can I do this? Can I do that? No. See, my grandmother used to make me do a lot of things that she shouldn't have done. There were things my mom used to get very mad at. Because at 3 years old, my grandmother had me peeling potatoes. A 3-year-old does not necessarily have the ability to be peeling potatoes. And I didn't. So I was getting my fingers. Later in life, I would still be peeling the goddamn potatoes. And I hate peeling potatoes now, by the way. So most of my, I will usually make my mashed potatoes with the peels on. I hate peeling them, and the peels are kind of good for you anyway, so I just sort of cut it and leave them. So, yeah. I cook them up as is. I just make sure that they're really clean first. But, yeah. It's not actually bad for you. There's actually a bit of nutrition in the skins, as long as you're not, like, frying them. So, then they're just kind of... You know what? Frying anything makes it fattier, so... Anyway, yeah. It's a broth that takes a long time to make. So, I took out what was left at the bottom of the pan, and it actually, because it's a really big thing, it's actually also meant to double as a cooker for, like, so that the house won't heat up whenever we make turkey. The only downside is that if you put any bird or anything in there that, like, isn't liquid, it'll kind of, like, cook the sides too much. So you have to be very careful of that. But I love using this thing for, like, large, huge... Okay, they're not just large. I shouldn't call them large. The pot that I have is large. This thing is, like, 2 of those. This is, like, there's the big bulbous pot that barely even sits on the stove. And I have to, like, put it back and be really careful so that it's not, positioned just right, so that otherwise it won't work. And I don't want to put it up too close front, because then it's tempting for Munchkin to touch, and because it's bulbous in shape, not just, So, I don't want it that close to the edge, because someone can bump into it. Yeah. It's one of those that you have to put on the back burner. And it's almost too big for that. The thing that I used is 2 of those. So there's, like, 4 good-sized containers of this. Just the stuff that was at the bottom. So I'm, like, looking at these good-sized containers. Those are each going to be a night that I make my cream soups. And that's where I just take some veggies, and after, I defrost it in the pan, I take some veggies and I cook that in there, make sure that it's cooked enough. And then, I add some milk and some cheese and, maybe some extra seasoning if it needs it. You just add whatever you need. And that serves as my base. It's safe. Well, as long as you, like, had it at a safe temp the whole time that you were making it to begin with. You don't want to let it go below 200 degrees. You probably want to keep it somewhere between, like, 250, around 250 at the lowest. I keep it around 250, as far as, like, a temp, whenever I am boiling whenever I'm simmering the bones. And it's time to go to bed because if you put it up at like 300, it can become more of an active boil in the middle of the night. Sometimes you can go up to 275. That's okay, but as long as like you know your stuff, I guess, and just know that it's not going to happen. You can. I've also regretted it because more of it boils off. It's around 250. It's you want to keep what's in the pot at least that temp. It's going to be hotter than that because there's a lid on it. But this works with oven temps. So this thing lets me set it really well. It's technically supposed to be for it works both as a slow cooker and a roaster. And you're supposed to technically be able to bake things in it, but it really doesn't work. You can try. It doesn't really roast or bake anything evenly, but it is wonderful for very large batches of stuff like this, which I make and then I freeze because it's a pain in the ass to make. This stew took, see, when we got back from the store, it took almost an entire bag of potatoes, 5-pound bag. So it took like 4 pans of potatoes, a bunch of veggies, and it's pretty thick stuff. And then, we had to make sure that we were stocked up because Chris has been wanting more veggies, so, And yeah. And then, of course, and then Chris wanted the meat in this one to be meatballs. I was like, I'm not standing there making the meatballs. I don't have time to do this on top of everything else. So we bought a bag of meatballs. I cheated on the meatballs. They kind of scare me because they float. I know how to make me some meatballs, and typically my meatballs don't float. That means that you've got like too much bread in them, like, and then they like expanded. That always scares me. Like the ones that expand, those are always the one that you're like, oh, that's going to like have the texture of a sponge, isn't it? That's not supposed to taste like that, but now I have to run with it because I can't do anything else. And this takes way too long to make. Of course, Chris likes it. And I guess that's what matters this go around. He likes it, so he actually requested it. He really wanted us to buy those, so I'm not thrilled about that. But I think that I didn't really have time, and it's actually cheaper than buying like 5 pounds of, or whatever. I think I would probably have needed like 5 or 10 pounds of ground beef just for the meatballs for this. So a large bag of frozen meatballs. I mean, every once in a while we make decisions like that. Chris likes them. I'm not entirely sure why. I did not grow up on frozen meatballs. Not until my grandfather sort of started taking an interest in the kitchen, and then, because I was spending so much time at after-school activities in high school. Yeah, the moment my grandmother gave me a shred of freedom, I was like, peace. You didn't see me at home. I was gone from 6:30 in the morning around roundabouts to 9 o'clock at night. and I would have to wait at school for hours on end for my grandfather to come pick me up. There was a point that I was actually allowed to take the bus to, go home. Like, not the school bus, but the actual bus. So that changed things as far as, like, me sitting there for 3 hours. But, yeah, I wasn't eager to come back. So, like, in my, like, senior year or so, I used to go off and catch some fish. Like, I would go back, I would grab my fishing rod, I would go fishing. And then I would give the fish to Doris. I would take it up nice and fresh, we'd debone it, and, get all the scales off, and we'd feed it to the cats. Because she fostered and rescued cats. And even though she was technically supposed to be retired, she wasn't actually retired. She was like, you never retire from this. So she ended up fostering a lot anyway. And she was actually the one who had fostered our dog before we'd gotten her. So, and yeah. I like to think at some point my grandmother at least warmed up to the dog. Not really to me, though. In fact, I don't actually have a good memory of my grandmother, which is actually pretty sad. I have neutral memories, they sort of exist at some point in time, but not really later. I mean, most of my memories of my grandmother are all bad. And, I can name things that my grandmother talked about as if they were a thing, and then I can be like, no, not really. See, I can remember loving my grandmother quite a bit, but I can also remember that I can't really say that I was happy. I mean, maybe there's this one moment whenever I was very little that I almost was, but then, reality sort of crashed down. Because my grandmother was that kind of person. My grandfather, on the other hand, I have quite a few happy memories with him. My mom, even my dad, I don't actually remember much about him. My stepdad, on the other hand, I mean, even him, I have, like, a couple happy memories of it. And that kills me to even say, considering what a scumbag he was. My little sister's dad, not really. Kind of just wish that he'd find his way off a cliff. I shouldn't say that. That's really bad. Most people, even the worst people that I ever met, usually there is some sort of positive memory. Not her. She was probably one of the people that I had the most opportunity to have the most good memories with, but the one I had the least with. All those stories that she would tell about us laying in bed watching movies, we did. What she didn't tell you were the things that she would say to me during those movies. Or how there was no pausing if Grandpa wasn't home. But I would have to get up every 5 minutes to go get her a drink, and I would have to miss parts. And then I would be told that it was my fault that I missed them. To a small child, that is very confusing. And she knew what she was doing, because if Grandpa was home, she paused. It was little stuff like that, long before it was big stuff. My grandmother wasn't unaware of what she was doing. She would even turn around and tell me that these things were wrong. and describe them and tell me that they were wrong before she turned around and did them. She had me doing things in the kitchen that aren't really safe to have a child doing by themselves. I could have been on one of these competitions that has kid chefs, but I could have done this as one of the younger kids. My grandmother had me peeling potatoes as a toddler, basically. At 3 years, I think I was around 3. I might not even have actually been 3 yet. And my mom saw my fingers and asked what happened. And I couldn't really tell her. This is how I know I was really young. Because I had a hard time even telling her. And I just sort of pointed at things. I didn't even know what some of this stuff was called yet. And you have to know, I started talking very early. So, yeah, I'm not even sure I was 3, because I was saying things that weren't normal for a 3-year-old to say at 3 years old. I had a very advanced vocabulary very young. So, I can't even say. Like, I think it was around 3-ish, but it was probably younger. So I had a hard time telling her, and eventually she figured it out, and I was able to repeat the word after she told me what it was. And that's how I learned what a potato peeler was. What a peeler was. And my mom was... And my grandmother used to make out like my mom would not let her see us for a while, because, you know, my mom was just unreasonable, vapid, and using us against her. But the truth of the matter is that my grandmother used us against our mom. And my mom always had a very good reason. And it always killed her, because we would cry and we would want to see grandma, especially me, because I was incredibly bonded with my grandmother, despite the fact that she was an evil, vapid bitch. So, you know, I didn't know that she was essentially conditioning me to put up with her shit. I didn't know anything. I was a little kid. So, the thing is that she did know. And I don't know what becomes more scary to people. I can honestly tell you that somebody who doesn't know that they're doing that scares me less than someone who knows that they're doing that. My grandmother knew what she was doing. That's what scares me more. And the rest of our relatives, I think it scares them less because they cannot even conceive this. There's not a damn thing my grandmother did that wasn't premeditated. She knew exactly the effect she had on the world around her, and she planned for it. There are a lot of people who don't know, and they don't plan for it. My grandmother was an exception to that. Most people do not even begin to be as manipulative as she was. Chris's mother, you know, the one who's not around and hasn't been in years, who needs to get her shit together and actually make her goddamn phone calls. I love him to pieces, but it hurts him. So, there's nothing I can do about it. And it hurts him. I can't make her call. We've messaged her. All this. It doesn't help. Every once in a while she makes a token gesture and just it falls. Never follows through with it. So, like, she asked if she could talk to him, but then, like, whenever he said yeah, she said that she'd lost her phone. He gave her the number. She never called. We double checked the numbers. She made sure that she had both, made sure that she knew schedules. She just never. She knew exactly where Chris's birthday party was going to be, what time it was going to be, made sure. It's all in Facebook Messenger. Time stamped and everything. And it shows that she read it. She never responded. Once she had that information, she didn't respond, she didn't show up, she didn't call, she didn't do nothing. This makes me mad. I would give my life just to have the chance for that with my kids. And I cannot even conceive what possesses someone to just not. And have that opportunity right in front of their faces. I can't. So anyway, my grandmother was a horrible person. But she's also dead, so, just to be clear, I didn't even talk about her half as, like, any time I talked about her, it was like, I was always afraid, even in therapy, that, I don't know, there was just always this fear that she was going to find out. Once she was dead, I didn't really know what to do. I cried more in relief that she died than anything else. I cried for what she left me to deal with by myself. I cried for the fact, for any sort of relationship that we lost, that there was nothing to make up anymore because she wasn't even around. I cried because I'd wanted her to admit that what she did was wrong. And in my mind, I'd convinced myself that one day she could do that. And that we could actually heal as a family if she did that. But that never happened. I cried for that lost chance. Just that possibility. I cried for the simple fact that I loved my grandmother and she was gone. But the biggest reason I cried was relief, because she couldn't hurt me or anyone else anymore. She couldn't call up and call crisis and cause problems for me. Oh, and X and his girlfriend did that for a little while. But, like, that was easier than her calling as my grandmother. Like, that was just somebody pretending to be me. That is still kind of a fucked up thing to deal with, but easier to prove than someone calling and not pretending to be you. And just sort of she would, I couldn't even tell her where I lived. My grandmother, I couldn't even tell my grandfather until she was dead. Once I had that studio apartment, yeah. I couldn't even tell my grandfather where I lived because he would not give me his word that he would not tell her. Anytime I tried to make him promise, he would just tell me that how worried she was about me and all this, but here's the thing. She really wasn't all that worried. My grandmother had a thing about control. The only thing that she was worried about was the fact that this wasn't a situation that she had control over. And I'd already seen what she did to Mom, and she'd already pretty much destroyed me to control me before. She got me fired from my job, all sorts of stuff. I wasn't going to tell her where I lived. She'd already created no limit of hell upon my life. That woman made living on this planet, living on this earth, hell. If there's a hell that exists, it was in that house. Under her care. Okay. But as hell as that was, I was more afraid in foster care than I was of her. Because at least I knew where it was coming from. I knew where it was going to come from. In foster care, I never knew. That adds its own level of terror because of the stuff that goes on. I just decided, at least here I had my grandfather and my dog. And, you know, it still wasn't as hell. There were a few times later, whenever therapist actually said to me, what I've seen here today, the reactions I can see in you, the fear I can see, the things I can hear, the things that she says, the things that you say, I'm supposed to report that. But you're old enough to make your own decisions. I think I was like 11 the first time somebody said that to me. And it was like 6 months before I turned 12 or something. And they said, in about 6 months, you'll be old enough to speak in court. I'm supposed to call CPS. Do you want me to call? I begged her not to, and she said that she would have to call anyway. I told her that if she called, I would kill myself. And I meant it. Not for the first time I ended up holding a knife against my own throat. I meant it. I didn't really want to die, but I didn't really want to live either. And if my choices were dying or that, then I would choose death. It was a rock and a hard place with no good direction that it could possibly go. State care is hell. Often they'll put you with people who are horrible. And sometimes those people will keep you. And my grandmother was horrible, but I only had to deal with it from her in that house. And I always knew where it was coming from. The only place I had to look behind me was when she was there. The only thing I had to fear was her. Yeah, as I got older, I learned to fear the people that she manipulated. But it didn't change the fact that that same crap happened in foster care too. And in foster care, you also have to deal with the other kids who aren't always nice. And some of them, if they're being hurt by someone, they're more than willing, some of them, to throw a younger child under the bus to that person. I was that younger child. Because where they placed me, I was technically not even old enough to be there. They weren't certified to take on a 6-year-old. The place my brother went took both genders and was certified. They wanted us separate because they looked at my brother and said that he was more adoptable than me. There was all the excuses that they gave. They were all lies. There was no reason my brother and I couldn't be placed together. They kept us separate on purpose. And then they kept us so much longer than they were supposed to, long after the judge ordered them to send us home. Whenever I came back from foster care, I didn't talk. Until then, there was a threat. They said that if I didn't start talking, at least to my mom and my brother, then they would take me again. They didn't say that to me, they said that to my mom. And my mom was, of course, terrified, and she just started crying. Because it had already happened before. This had already happened before, but it was very short-lived. I didn't talk much right after my dad died. But it passed on its own. This didn't, and persisted for months. And all I wanted was for my mom to stop crying. And I was so scared. And they were gonna take me, and I couldn't go back. And I just started crying. I still didn't talk much for a little while. But the first thing I said was, "Mom, don't leave me." I was just so scared that they would take her away from me again. The same child that went in didn't come out. My mom knew. My brother had trouble with it. He changed too, but not as much. And then she died. They used to threaten us with so many different things. Even with me and my brother in the room. The worker on the case, despite court order against it, forced my mom to accept my little sister's dad back into the home. She forced my mom into going to Bible studies with her. My mom was forbidden from practicing her own religion in her own home. Out of fear that if questioned, we would give it away. We'll have seen it, anything to do with it. I did see. And I didn't tell on Mom. I saw her once. And she buried it back in her jewelry box. Crying. And the wax of the candles was just to anyone else, it would have just been a couple candles on her dresser and my mom crying in front of her jewelry box.